All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining this session. It's very exciting to see that we have a full room this morning to address this very important question of peace and water. We're meeting at a time where tensions over resources are more and more compounding the climate and security peace agenda. In this rapidly changing environment, water is both a threat multiplier as well as an opportunity. As we heard also from the ICRC representative this morning, both are not mutually exclusive. Needless to say, climate change most often manifests itself through water. So across the continents, we see similar phenomena. So we see devastating floods across Southeast Asia, but also in Europe. We see droughts that wreak havoc in the Sahel up to the Middle East. This poses significant challenges to water governance and water access. And the third element would be conflict. So as we've heard also from the figures this morning, more than 130 active conflicts in the world, in which, unfortunately, there's also a dimension in which water infrastructure, dams, supply networks are targeted deliberately to the disadvantage of the local population. And yet, in midst of these challenges, there are also opportunities. So rather, water has also this potential to connect, to build bridges rather than to divide. It is such an essential resource that spans really across all parts of life. It's basically important for food, for health, for social development, economic development, and of course, security. So because of these very characteristics, there are opportunities to use water for peace building. This reflection about the nexus, peace, and water is not something completely new. It's something that at least since 10 years, I would say, through the work of the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace, has gained importance on the highest political agenda with the milestone report, A Matter of Survival, which has provided recommendations that are still very relevant in today's world, and of which the Geneva Water Hub is still implementing some of them. At the same time, at the multilateral level, we've seen an interest in the topic growing. So in 2016, it was Senegal that brought it to the attention of the Security Council for the first time, bringing this agenda topic on the Security Council. But then in several instances as well, through area formula meetings, or also more recently at the Security Council on the protection of fresh water. So there seems to be an interest, but yet at the same time, water, and even to a lesser extent, water and peace, seem not to be at the highest political agenda. And I think we all know some of the reasons. There are political sensitivities linked to it, but I would argue that it's also because there's a lack of understanding and a lack of evidence also on how water can be an entry point for solving conflicts and across the whole conflict peace spectrum. That's exactly the gap that we're going to be addressing today. So we will have three distinguished speakers that will guide us with lightning talks through these three aspects, so from prevention to conflict transformation to post-conflict dimension, to hear more about that. So today with us we have Natasha Karmi. She's our senior program manager, Water and Peace at the Geneva Water Hub. We have Sonia Koppel from the UN Water Convention. She's the secretary of the UN Water Convention. Thank you very much, Sonia, for joining us. And Charity Watson, climate peace and climate security advisor at the United Nations mission in Afghanistan. Thank you very much. So yes, we will hear these three lightning talks, and then I will explain more in detail, but we will do kind of a breakout in a breakout, looking at these three dimensions that we just mentioned, and really also hear from you. So it's going to be hopefully something interactive and enjoyable to you. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Natasha, to talk a bit more about how, in your experience at the Geneva Water Hub, and also on your personal experience, how water has been an enabling factor in peace, and more specifically also this angle of protecting water, how that could contribute to peace. And please use your microphones. It has been instructed to do that.
Thank you. It's working, right?
Yeah, I think it's just for the online.
Okay, so thank you, Basilio, for setting the scene. It's definitely nice to be surrounded by some familiar colleagues and friends from the water community, but I think more exciting to have other colleagues from other sectors, especially that, as Basilio mentioned, our intervention, my intervention in particular, will focus on the use of water for peace diplomacy. And Sonia will be talking more about the aspect of the water sharing on transboundary water resources and how technical water cooperation is actually used to improve relationships. But allow me just to explain a little bit what we do at the Geneva Water Hub, in a sense that we actually use water for political disputes, but we also use politics for water disputes. So that means that everything that we do is we try to bring in the science and the law in a way that we could actually use it to feed into political processes with an end objective of actually getting to peace building, getting to reconciliation. So we are a center of excellence that is anchored at the University of Geneva and the Geneva Graduate Institute. And as Basilio mentioned, our blueprint is actually the recommendations of the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace. And we ourselves, have been also trying to zoom in on what is the definition of water for peace, so that in our conversations with our partners, that could be something that could be digestible, it could be practical. And in his note to the Secretary General, the Special Rapporteur on the Human Right to Water and Sanitation, Mr. Pedro Araujo, had defined it in his report as promoting equitable distribution of good quality water through robust legal, institutional, and policy frameworks, particularly prioritizing human dignity, fairness, inclusivity, greater social cohesion, sustainable use, and effective management. The water community, of which a number of us are part of, has for at least the last 50 years been using water sharing as a confidence-building measure among riparian states. But with current global risks and challenges, in order to ensure peaceful communities, we definitely need to have a game-changing shift of mindsets in the way that we tackle water and peace challenges. We do a great job in actually, sharing water for peace, but what we need to do more is to spare water for peace. I won't talk a lot about the sharing aspect. I'll leave that for Sonia and the convention. But I would like to be able to share one quick example on the sharing water and how we could actually be using it in a context that is also relevant, to those of you that are working more specifically on climate change, security, and peace building. 2 years ago, we had a concrete project of using this Water for Peace framework in collaboration with national stakeholders in Iraq and with UNDP under its Catalytic Climate Action project. And what that entailed was to assist basically the national stakeholders in developing a climate resilient transboundary water arrangement. So that means that, in that kind of approaches, the idea is to be able to develop, diplomatic relationships that take into consideration not just the water rights, but also the climatic change and the aspects of security and prosperity. Through basically the adoption of this basin-wide holistic approach that anchors the principles of water law and that tries to harmonize them within the national and international legal frameworks. On the issue of sparing of water, we've all, and this has been mentioned several times today, that these crises are actually eroding international law. They are actually eroding multilateralism. So within that kind of setting where actually water in armed conflict is being weaponized, is being both actually a victim and a target, there's obviously a need for us to engage more in that space of being able to have the courage and to find the evidence to be able to talk about the protection of these water systems. Why is it important? Because the protection of water systems is actually protection of lives. It's actually the protection of human dignity, and it's the right to access water and sanitation. Why should, those of you in the climate change, peace and security, advocate and support the protection of water systems? Is because these very systems do not just underpin human survival. They also play a key role in the resilience to impacts of climate change in peace times. And in post-conflict settings, these enable these systems to bounce back faster and entail less economic costs. Julian is in the room, and I think she can speak to this with a lot of evidence that the targeting of these water systems actually unfolds at so many different levels. We have the direct impacts, which everyone is aware of, which is the access to water and sanitation, but it's rather the indirect effects and the cumulative and the reverberating effects, which are quite challenging when it comes to climate change adaptation and mitigation. It is, the effects of the spread of preventable diseases, the economic collapse, the groundwater contamination, the exodus of skilled engineers, the fact that there are unexploded ordnance renders wells and springs inaccessible. All of these factors are actually eroding the capacity for resilience, whether it's resilience for climate change or whether it's resilience for conflict settings. That is why, in order to be able to fill in the gap, because obviously we do have developments in international legal frameworks and tools to protect the water. However, there is a persistent gap in actually the enforcement, the implementation. So the reality on the ground tells a different story. So what can be done? And in order to close this gap, there's obviously a need to enhance political will and leverage accountability. That is why in May 2024 at the UN in New York, a multilateral initiative was launched. It was co-founded by the Geneva Water Hub, the Republic of Slovenia, and Switzerland. And it was entitled the Global Alliance to Spare Water from Armed Conflict. The alliance, as it stands today, is composed of state and non-state actors. It brings in together a multidisciplinary community of states, humanitarian organizations, legal experts, civil society, all of whom with the objective of providing this science-based advocacy and coalition building in a way that it could bridge these legal principles that remain at that theoretical level with humanitarian realities, in a sense that it shows how we could effectively on the ground work collaboratively to actually protect the infrastructure. Most recently, in May 2025, and as part of the protection of the Civilians Week that was organized by OCHA, the UN Security Council actually held an area formula meeting on the topic to address it. The theme was protecting water in armed conflict. So we can already see that there is a momentum at that political level to actually elevate the protection of water infrastructure and water-dependent services. So allow me also to share a practical example of how this is playing out, in a sense that we do need to be able to provide the evidence base, which means that we need to be able to have case studies, we need to be able to document as much as possible the damage that has occurred to infrastructure, and to be able to use that knowledge in order also to build the capacity not only of technicians on the ground, not just of humanitarian actors, but also the military, bringing in, the security personnel to be able to actually understand how water could be better integrated into standard operations procedures. This will enable us to mitigate the impact of conflict, and it will enable us to actually build pre-conflict resilience. Concretely, my colleagues are currently working on the Yemen case study, and I think both to the water community and to the climate change community, That is a country that really resonates not only in terms of basically having a deficit, a significant deficit in terms of meeting the water demand. It's also one of the driest nations on earth. There are no major rivers or permanent surface water. And already, prior to the conflict, Yemen had entered the armed conflict acutely and vulnerably. Of course, it's a big challenge because of the data, because of the accessibility, but that is the kind of work that we need to be able to engage in, because Yemen's water crisis is not just a story of scarcity. It's a politically induced scarcity, and it is, the erosion of the very systems that underpin survival. I hope that soon we will be also able to share with all of you the results of our study once, we have verified enough information. I think I'll stop here. And I'll give you back the floor.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for shedding this light on this very important aspect of the protection of water. And I really like the emphasis beyond all the substantial issues that you have touched upon, but really on the preventive side, like these preconditions for resilience on the one hand in terms of climate, but also in terms of human development and also the realization of the human right to water and sanitation. So thank you very much. Next up, we have Charity Watson, and here we'll hear from her experience in a very specific context that has been has been severely affected by climate change and also by fragility. So Charity, please. Looking forward to that.
Great. Thank you, Basilio. And I guess still good morning to everyone. It's really lovely to be here today in Berlin and with so many different experts from all over the world. I'll be sharing some reflections on, can water transform conflict, particularly from, the work that I've been doing in Afghanistan. I'd like to start by just reflecting on a visit I had in Helmand province in Musakala district, which was one of the most heavily impacted districts from the conflict. And districts where the elders actually really supported the insurgency, the Taliban insurgency at the time. And they told us, what's the point of schools or roads or clinics if we don't have water? Another community told our deputy SRSG, he said, when he asked, what are the priorities in this community that was heavily impacted by climate shocks? They said our first priority is water, our second priority is water, and our third priority is water. When we spoke to women who've been displaced because of water scarcity, amidst all of the challenges women are facing in Afghanistan at present, they said many hardships can be endured, but water scarcity is unbearable. So this is sort of the overall human feedback that we get. I could go into all the data and things on the overall water situation and crisis in Afghanistan, but water is really at the center of climate vulnerability in the country, and it's the center of climate change impacts. And it's also happening now. This is not something that is far in the future. It is unfolding. It's also at the center of climate security risks. We are already seeing local conflicts over water resources. We're already seeing drought and environmental related displacement. New IOM figures show that over 75% of internal displacement in Afghanistan is now related to environmental factors. And that's spurring more tensions over migration between host communities and migrants, whether that's nationally or locally, regionally or further afield. And it's also, of course, complicating transboundary cooperation over water, where Afghanistan shares 87% of its water resources with its riparian neighbors. Because of decades of conflict and underdevelopment in the country, the water sector itself is really underdeveloped, both in terms of infrastructure, in terms of water management, and in terms of water governance. And so this means that the sector is struggling. There's very little resilience then to deal with climate change and the impacts it's having on the hydrological cycle. On top of that, we have, since 2021, the Taliban takeover, right? Where we have an unrecognized government that has very little capacity and understanding of technical sectors like the water sector, limited financing, and frankly, there's limited appetite from the international community to really substantively engage with them. And I think this leaves the people bearing the brunt of these shocks at a local level. And this is even the case, when the UN Security Council, under UN Security Council Resolution 2679, recommended an independent assessment on Afghanistan, and that independent assessment on Afghanistan recommended increased engagement with the Taliban on things like climate adaptation and water management. And there's still hesitance to do so. So even if the conflict in Afghanistan has subsided, there's not really peace yet. And my work over the last 2 years has been to engage with the Taliban on things like climate change, water, and environment more broadly. So this question of can water be a bridge, and specifically in this context in Afghanistan, I asked, can water be a bridge with an actor like the Taliban? And in many respects, over the last 2 years, I think it shows that it already has been. We've had promising engagements that have brought together diverse stakeholders, including, the Taliban de facto authorities, communities, NGOs, UN agencies, other ministries, and including Afghan women in many of these examples, where we've been able to discuss issues like early warning systems, disaster risk reduction, water management, or climate adaptation. We've found that at local levels, joint community asset creation, particularly water infrastructure, so whether it's a small-scale reservoir or a canal, can actually build social cohesion at a local level between communities that have been heavily impacted by conflict over decades, and that it paves space for example, the inclusion of women, or for protection programming, because the communities and the Taliban want this type of, small-scale community infrastructure so badly that they're also willing to be flexible on some other aspects of the programming. We found at a national level, we've been able to have engagements with various different ministries on things like an integrated water resource management roadmap, or, for example, the nationally determined contributions under UNFCCC, or on environmental policy, that allow us to have discussions with them about what does it mean to have governance responsibility for people. And we've had officials come to us and say, we do not have the capacity to step into really complex engagements with our neighbors over transboundary water cooperation. And we found that when we've been able to bring experts, to the table, to have discussions, to have presentations with them, that it really begins to foster, slowly, more trust even between their government and the international actors. So there's, of course, challenges on the Taliban side, of course, but also on the international community side. The international community broadly has been promoting engagement with the de facto authorities. But then there's a hesitance to really do so on technical topics like this that are really fundamental to the needs of the people. So I'll repeat something that I said in a session yesterday, that we all like to talk about inclusion when it's inclusion of women, inclusion of youth, inclusion of indigenous communities, sort of all the actors that are comfortable for us to talk about. But we get really uncomfortable when we start talking about inclusion of actors like the Taliban, or of other maybe groups in whichever context that you work in. And we also have this perception that peace is going to be this clean and beautiful and easy thing. When in reality, I think peacemaking and peace building, it can be messy, it can be uncomfortable, it can be complicated. So I'll finish by saying, can water be a bridge? I think absolutely. And we have begun to build a bridge in a place like Afghanistan over water. But it's required us to step into those uncomfortable spaces. And I think it requires us also to think about what are the potential limits of that. We can build the bridge, but can we actually cross it? And that, I think, is still to be determined, but I'll finish there. Thanks.
Thank you very much for closing with this open question. I hope that maybe we can discuss this further after. And I really like the emphasis on this trust building aspect, right? So that people, when dealing with such a fundamental issue such as water, they need to come together, willing or unwilling. There's just this human need to come and sit at the table. So thank you very much, Charity. And our last lightning talk will be by Sonja Köppel. So here we will hear more about the transboundary water cooperation and how this has helped, but mostly in post-conflict situation, and also about tools that we have at the multilateral level to continue to foster dialogue around water.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Sonja Köppel, and we have heard already this morning quite a lot about the importance of water for climate change and how most of the climate change impacts are transmitted through the water cycle. But what we've not heard so much is that more than 60% of freshwater resources worldwide are shared by 2 or more countries. And 153 countries worldwide share rivers, lakes, and aquifers. There are more than 500 shared aquifers and more than 300 shared rivers and many more lakes. And here we can see that climate change is, on the one hand, a risk multiplier because many of the transboundary basins are particularly vulnerable to climate change. But on the other hand, climate change can also be an entry point for cooperation. And overall, if we look back at the last decades and even centuries, we can see that actually transboundary cooperation has brought benefits beyond water, has actually helped to stabilize societies, to improve resilience, to promote climate action and regional integration, and also, for example, environmental protection and others. So I would like to mention 4 factors how transboundary cooperation has helped in this regard. Firstly, it helps to prevent conflicts and to consolidate peace in post-conflict situations. And that's through the principles of international water law, which actually, we can really say, lay down the principles benefiting all riparian countries, both upstream and downstream, and ensure predictability in relations, if respected, and reduce uncertainty in the relation between the countries. So this includes the principle of equitable and reasonable utilization, the principle of prevention of significant harm, and the principle of cooperation. These principles are laid down in international treaties. So there are 2 UN conventions, and particularly the one I'm working for, so-called UN Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lakes, or UN Water Convention. And that convention actually originated from the security community, because in the early 90s, when in Europe many new borders appeared after the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Conference for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or today OSCE, said we need a framework for the countries to work together and to prevent conflicts over such shared waters. So they mandated UNECE to develop a convention where the countries could exactly work together, which then was adopted in 1992 in Helsinki and entered into force in 1996. And so for more than 30 years now, that Water Convention has exactly helped to prevent conflicts, has inspired more than 140 transboundary agreements, and built capacity of thousands of experts in these fields. And since 2016, this convention has now been opened up globally. 16 countries from outside the UNECE region have joined, and many of them are from post-conflict regions, such as Iraq, Chad, Nigeria, Sierra Leone just joined last month. And more than 20 are in the process of joining, including, for example, South Sudan, Somalia, and many others. But the Water Convention also concretely helps countries to, in cooperation on the ground, for example, through its implementation committee, which is a committee composed of legal and technical experts, where the countries can turn when they have difficulties in implementing the convention and when they have actually tensions and conflicts. So, for example, the committee has recently helped in an advisory procedure Albania and Montenegro in a conflict over a shared hydropower, over a hydropower facility constructed upstream. So we hope that more countries will join the Water Convention soon, and as I said, many are in the process. The Water Convention promotes cooperation on the ground in shared basins. And this is the second aspect I wanted to focus on. Transboundary water cooperation can help to build regional organizations which really promote stability and regional integration. For example, in Lake Chad, which was already mentioned earlier on this morning, the Lake Chad Basin Commission is a basin organization created between the riparian countries to manage jointly their water resources, but it also hosts the multinational security force created to combat insecurity in the region and to fight Boko Haram. So a water organization which is hosting a security and which takes a holistic approach by also looking at human security by trying to address the root causes of conflict, socioeconomic problems, education problems, and others. Another example, more from Europe, is the Sava. So that's a basin in the Balkan region shared by Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, and Serbia. And here, after the war in the 90s, water was really an entry point for cooperation. And the Sava Agreement was the first international treaty signed by the riparian countries after the conflict, after the war. And this has led to the creation of the Sava Commission, an international commission continuing action up to today, which supports the countries not only in water, but also in disaster risk reduction and navigation and other related topics, and in climate change adaptation, for example, by setting up a regional early warning system for flooding, etc., etc. A third aspect is that transboundary water cooperation can generate benefits which stabilize societies and reduce sectoral trade-offs and conflicts. For example, in the Rhine Basin, in 1950, so just 5 years after the end of the Second World War, the countries came together to create the International Commission for the Protection of the Rhine, which has, over the last 75 years, helped the countries to tackle the problem of water pollution, so actually to really reduce water pollution in the basin, and to bring back salmon, so fish, to upstream migration, upstream Switzerland. And this shows how water cooperation can have many benefits also beyond water. There are many more examples which I could talk about. Maybe we have more time in the breakout group to go into detail, for example, also from West Africa, etc. And the final point, transboundary cooperation can help to make adaptation more effective and efficient and to prevent negative impacts of unilateral measures. So it can help to make adaptation more effective by widening the knowledge base, by sharing data across borders, by also enlarging the planning space, because sometimes it can be more effective to locate an infrastructure for adaptation to climate change upstream or downstream in a basin, and by the possibility to share costs and benefits. And this is why also under the Water Convention, already back in 2006, a task force on water and climate was created, at that time co-chaired by Germany and the Netherlands, today by Netherlands and Ghana, which has developed guidance, collection of good practices, which also provides a global platform to share experiences, and has a global network of basins working on climate change and a program of pilot projects. And one of them is, for example, in the Dniester River Basin, shared by Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova, where in the early 2000s, the countries came to us to ask for support on reducing flood risk in the basin. And then we have helped them, together with OSCE, to develop a transboundary climate risk assessment, vulnerability assessment, a transboundary climate adaptation strategy. And that has later on facilitated the development of the Dniester Treaty and setting up the Dniester Commission, which continues now even in the war situation, and where also at times the breakaway Transnistria region has been engaged. So finally, I think we need to bring those examples, those good practice examples, to the global stage. And in the global climate change negotiations, and the global adaptation decided at COP 28 in Dubai, the importance of transboundary cooperation is mentioned. So we really hope that also in the currently ongoing discussions on indicators to measure the progress on this, to be decided in Belém at COP30, that also those aspects we're discussing here today, including transboundary cooperation, is included. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for giving us this overview about all the work that, I mean, mostly through the Water Convention, but beyond that, how this is a powerful instrument also really for, again, we don't have to be too strict about this preventive, during and after, but really it goes, one element goes into another. And it really, these tools such as the commission that exists, or you were mentioning West Africa, these are really powerful tool that even when there's the resurgence of conflict have been useful in reducing these tensions. So this was it for the 3 lightning talks. Thank you very much to our 3 speakers for these inspiring words. Now I have a question to the organizers, because we started about 10 minutes late. So if all the participants agree, I would like to extend to ask for another additional 10 minutes so that we can proceed with the original plan, if that is fine with Adelphi. Excellent. So the idea now would be that we break into 3 groups, and that basically the 3 speakers will be moderating discussions around these 3 dimensions, all right? The preventive side, the during conflict aspect, and the post-conflict aspect. And here we really would like to hear from you. So we will have about 10 minutes, a bit less, but around 10 minutes for each table, and then the groups will move so that you can go across all the 3 dimensions. Then we will come back in plenary. The facilitators will bring back the highlights, and then we will close and all go for lunch. So without further ado, it would be great if, I don't know, we take this first bunch up to there in that corner. We take the second one in the second corner, and the third part here. So you will be addressing the 3 questions that our speakers have prepared, and they will guide you through this for the next 25-30 minutes. Does that sound all right to you? Good. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for this, which seemed very lively and interesting discussion. So we didn't go with the original plan of having 3 rotation. That was a bit too optimistic. I hope you found interesting discussion in the one that you attended to. So now, just before closing, we'll ask the 3 facilitator just to report back a bit on the discussions, and they're really also in hindsight at looking at the experiences that were shared, and also in terms of, to the extent possible, also in terms of recommendation, or what can we really take home and then try to apply also in our daily works, in our policies, and also at the global level. So I would like to first give the floor to Sonia, maybe, which was chairing this table on the preventive dimension, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you. I wouldn't say that we only talked about prevention. We talked about the whole continuum, like probably the other groups as well. And yeah, on the one hand, we heard that challenges are increasing in many parts of the world due to securitization of water, due to politicization of water at transboundary level, due to dam construction, due to investments not respecting social and environmental principles, and other factors. But we did also speak about some good practice and recommendations, which is to try to find a common point of interest between countries in a transboundary basin, which can be indeed climate change or flood risk reduction or others. Then to start cooperation at a technical level, for example, between experts, scientists, civil society, etc. We also heard about or discussed the need of governance, which governance at global level, but also national level and even local level. But they're all interlinked. And the need to learn from each other and to share experience, for example, through training programs, through taking the countries out of their basin context, which can be very politicized and difficult, and bringing them, for example, to another basin where actually cooperation is working, and also, for example, to the Water Convention at global level, where all such practices are coming together. And we heard also about the importance of sometimes involving mediators or third parties into conflict resolution, which can be different, can be from UN side, can be from civil society side, can be others, can be the World Bank, and then discussed also, for example, in the Water Convention with the implementation committee I mentioned earlier. Yeah, thank you.
Very much, Sonia.
Great. So in our group, we were talking about the transformative dimension of water, and particularly what are the opportunities, but also what are the limits to this potential. We started out by discussing sort of the multi-scalar dimensions, where you might actually have work that can be done locally that, for example, improves water conflicts on a local level, but then the construction of local infrastructure might actually exacerbate conflict at a transboundary level. So how do you balance, or vice versa, right? You might have a transboundary agreement that actually, once it's implemented, exacerbates, local issues. So how do you balance it across a basin? The second thing we talked about was sort of the local or community level versus the political level. So there are examples from Somalia where actually there can be quite a lot of success in coming to agreements at a local level around water. But then once you come to the political level around water, it can become a lot more caught up in sort of elite interests, political economy dimensions, and having to balance those different issues. At that level, we discussed quite in depth, how do you approach the issue of political will of those actors that you actually need to engage in around water cooperation, and particularly this issue of mutual gains, which I know is a big issue when it comes to transboundary water cooperation. The fourth thing was the role of innovation, and how can that actually spur cooperation. We discussed sort of the way that innovation could reduce sensitivities, whether that's through remote sensing that can reduce some sensitivities over data sharing, but also what is the potential moving forward for how can new technology help us to understand and harness those mutual gains. And then finally, which is my own reflection after the discussion, I think while there's a good case for water opening entry points, it doesn't necessarily negate the need to really deal with the difficult, sticky issues around political economy and the division of those benefits. So, thanks.
Thank you. From the post-conflict dimension.
Okay, well, I have to start off by saying that within the discussions, it was clear that we can't, within the protracted conflicts, talk about post-conflict. So most of the examples that were shared were actually about ongoing conflicts, and how can we actually, try to influence, or how can we actually use the water and the climate change in a way that it could create those opportunities. So I think everyone was consensus on that framing that, we can't talk about it. There were a couple of, examples that were shared, in Syria, in the Sahel. There was the experience in southern Colombia that, actually a question was put forward on how, what kind of strategies could be made to facilitate this intercommunal conflict. It was clear, from the various examples that all of these, initiatives and projects were not really at the political level as, we would be able to define it. It was really that was being led, by community leaders, by technocrats. In the case of Colombia, it was the women. I think also, in the Sahel, it's also, at that level. So when we look at the level of community engagement, mid-management, community leaders, obviously, there is room to be able to use, these technical spaces, whether they are water, whether they are climate, in the case, or food security, or seed systems, in order to be able to bridge the gaps and bring those communities, on both sides of contact lines, or in conflict, to be able to start dialogues and engage better. However, I think what was missing from all of this is how could we actually, bring that to a higher level of where the actual political decision-making is happening. But that said, on a positive note, I think there are examples, that one could use in order to be able to showcase that, the argument that we're putting forward by saying that, climate change, water, food, all of these vital, issues to the communities, to the livelihood of the communities could be, entry points, and that if we have enough evidence base, then that would be, something that would entail, the political processes and engagement, similar to basically what happened in the issue of the protection. There was a lot of evidence, technical work that was done, and then that was brought to the highest level, at the UN Security Council.
Thank you very much to all three of you for all this diligently reporting back. That's very rich content that will be captured, so I will not go into the details, also because we're above time. But overall, I hope that this was an informative session to everyone. I hope that it showed the relevance of the topic. I mean, there are topics that still need to be addressed. I think this last component on the from the community, or like mid-management to top-level political engagement, is something that is worth delving into in another form, maybe after lunch or after a couple of days. At the same time, I think that in terms of policy, beyond the climate, there's going to be a big UN water conference next year, right? So, and I think that's at least the agenda that we have at the Geneva Water Hub, but also to try to position more and more the peace angle into these water forum, because it hasn't been the case recently, right? So there are interactive dialogues, there's going to be one on cooperation, so that's the easiest way to go into it. But it's a call on the whole community also to try to engage in these discussions, because the moment is extremely timely. It's the third UN Water Conference in about 50 years, and it will also set a precedent for whatever comes next in terms of SDGs, in terms of realization. So better linking these two aspects, SDG 6, SDG 16, but also climate change will be extremely important. So right, thank you very much, and I hope it was informative, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.